Hey, my students. Good day, my students. I am Dr. Ubaidullah Muhammad Bello from Department of English of this noble institution. My course is ENG 112, that is Basic English Composition 1. I have the following topics to discuss with you. The first topic is the concept of a composition. The term composition is deciphered mostly based on the context of usage and invariably accompanied by the user's intentions. For instance, a singer, composition to a singer would undoubtedly mean how words are put together or arranged to produce the sense of musicality or instrumentality. But to somebody who is not into music, for instance, for this particular target course, composition is devoid of what a singer thinks of it to be. It has to do with a kind of putting words together to form a particular embodiment of meaning, not actually having any instrumentality or effect of instrumentality. There are different spheres where a call for writing would have to reflect itself. For instance, to a painter too, composition may mean the art of putting objects together for the purpose of creating pictures, to educate, to entertain, or to do whatever the painter is aimed at achieving. So by this we mean, for us to hear the word composition, we don't need to involve ourselves into conclusion of what it is in one side. We have to understand the context within which it is used for its preferable meaning to be deciphered. In this particular course, as I have already said, the composition meaning it carries has to do with how we put words together, to develop sentences and paragraphs for effective communication purposes or goals. We have structures of composition. The first structure of composition in question is introduction. By introduction we mean a kind of the background of what you are set at achieving in terms of your writing. You must prepare the minds of the readers in order to evoke the interest in them and for them to have this kind of spirit of wanting to read through your compositions. This is mostly where the mind of a reader is prepared or equipped with the ideas that are presented in the composition. The opening sentence in the introduction should arouse the sense of expectation. And this is just to say, barred introduction in terms of composing words to produce sentences and even paragraphs is going to hammer the interest of a readership, because that is where the theme or the basic preoccupation of the writer is homed. The next structure is body. The body of a composition is where the writer discusses what prompted him or her into the sheaf of writing. It is where we see the writer encompassing all it is said in the introduction and to expatiate the aspect. All these things are achieved in the body of a composition. It is the body of the composition that the writer already arouses the interest of the reader and is sustained there, because in the introduction is just to prepare the mind and to evoke the interest, while here the interest of the reader lies in how the writer is able to bring different things together and compartmentalized into sections and subsections or headings and subheadings themes and sub-themes and the rest, depending on the nature of the topic in question on the mind of the writer. The last one is conclusion. From the name conclusion, this is where the writer concludes whatever is being mentioned and the idea being propelled in the body, which is explained. In the concluding part, we see the writer generating instances where he lies or where she lies in terms of what idea is being conceived and prepared and even explained in the body of the composition. So every good composition is supposed to have a kind of a very good ending, which is referred to as conclusion. This is where the body of the composition embodies a set of a set that is at rest. It sums up what the writer has said in the body. So it's just the summation of what is explained in the body of the composition. We have kinds of composition. The first one is essay writing. Every creative process in use has to lie on the use of a language, and this language is rule governed. Languages operate based on rules and that guide and govern acceptable usage in both speech and writing respectively. Certain social norms govern the kind of language that should be used when writing, and on this note, essay writing requires certain kinds of language rules too. So essay is a form of composition which has the following typology or types. One is narrative essay. From the name narrative, the word narrative is got from the word narration. And that narration too is got from the root word narrate, and to narrate is to tell a story. There are different ways of introducing a narrative essay. Some start by introducing the characters, while some people present the setting so as to properly situate the narrative. What is highly important at this juncture is that it should be done in such a way that it prompts the reader to be interested and to continue reading the essay. The introduction of an essay writing of this narrative effect often gives the background information which can help the reader to have a better understanding of the narrative. If the introduction of the narrative is not interesting or challenging to sustain the interest of the readership, the book or the narrative piece could be abandoned or put aside until an opportune time when the reader feels he has enough time to go through it or to go further narrative, which can also be referred to as a novel. So narrative essay in a nutshell is also known as storytelling essay. I said to narrate is to tell a story, right? Every narrative essay is just a storytelling essay. It tells a story. It is not a story that is said to be dramatic. It is not written in act and scenes. It is just a kind of a storytelling, as the reader is using what we call authorial voice. You just hear a voice telling you that so thing happens, so person does this or that, these people do this. You see, we are not acting. The writer or the narrator is just telling, not acting. So this is different from what we call drama. Drama is a story that is not narrated, but it is acted on stage and before audience. While this narrative, or a story we call narrative, has to do with a story that is only told, not acted. It has no business with the world of drama, which we refer to as stage. Every narrative essay has some elements. Now, elements of narrative essay. A good narrative essay involves a judicious use of the following elementary tools with which the narrative survives. 1. Plot. plot has to do with the series of incidents or events forming the plan of action of a particular story, okay, or play, or even poem. But here we're referring to the aspect of just a narrative or a story that is not referred to as a play or a poetry. So you have to decide on the series of incidents you want to write about. There could be 10, there could be 20, 15, etc. You also have to order the event in such a way that they follow what we call sequential or chronological order. Sequential based on time, chronological based on happening. So when you put event and incident in this order, we now say you achieve the plot of your writing. It simply means that a plot is giving you the clue or the word of arrangement in such a way that the interest already aroused by you in the readership, okay, should be sustained. If not, bad plot of a story gives a kind of a picture of what the readership not having interest in whatever they read out of the piece of your work, which is called a narrative essay. So these events are arranged chronologically or even sequentially so that the readership is sustained and the interest too lying in the readership mind is sustained. For example, you cannot say somebody died on Tuesday and then he was driving around town the next Friday. In fact, there is a problem. It means the plot of that story is not achieved. The next element of narrative essay is the setting. The setting has to do with either a place or the time in which the story is said or told. Every story has a setting or must have a setting. So every narrative must have a setting, and that is the place the story is set or the reference to a specific place or what is mentioned as a place in the story. For instance, Achebe's Things Fall Apart has places like Umuofia and Mbano and other villages. The villages, the Umuofia, the Mbano, all together deal with what we call setting or settings of that particular story. Okay, now you cannot write without situating your narrative, or else it will look like a fairy tale that is told by an excited human being. Setting can simply refer to a time when actions occur or the geographical area where the set actions unfold. So place and time of a story are what we call the settings of that particular story. The next element is characters. Character in discussion of a narrative essay has meaning. It deciphers different from when we talk about character when dealing with a language itself, as in a site, a story. I can say you have a bad character. It means your attitude is bad. You have lackadaisical attitude or nonchalant attitude or happy-go-lucky attitude. Character there means attitude. But talking about character in narrative essay, we're referring to someone or something. Okay, it mustn't be a human being. Character in a story must not be a human being. Characters can be animals, they can be objects, they can be even ideas. Because in narrative essays like fable, allegory, as examples of fiction, which has to do with a story that is told based on the writer's imagination or fantasy, a story that is not realistic, a story that is told for the effect of what? Entertainment. Somebody may wish not to use human beings. It means the story can be peopled by animal characters, and that is what we call fable. So it means characters in the story must not be human beings, and there will be no story without characters. This is another convention of the narrative that has to be followed. If there are no real characters, you must create them and make them say what you want them to say, and also achieve what you want them to achieve, the characters must have specified names and functions. They must also be able to interact with one another so that the theme or the thematic preoccupation can be properly understood by the readership. So characters again can be major or minor or even dynamic and what? Static. Not every participation or performance of a character in a story must be the same with another character. This is where we talk about minor characters and major characters. For instance, in Things Fall Apart, Okonkwo must be there. He's a major character. You cannot remove him. But there are characters like Obuefi, Zendu, okay? Those characters do not have much effect in the story. You can remove them, so they are minor characters. And we talk about dynamic character or static character. Dynamic character is a character that changes attitudes, that whose attitude can never be predetermined by anybody. You cannot predict what the character can do. That is why we say the character is dynamic. But static character is a character that, in fact, you can just predict what they can do and still it lies. Okonkwo is a dynamic character because his attitude changes. He's been portrayed by the writer Achebe as somebody who is indefatigable, somebody who is indomitable. But we see Okonkwo committing suicide. You never expect Okonkwo to commit suicide. That is the dynamic effect as a character in him. So he's dynamic. But Unoka, his father, has static character. So he's a static character because you know him as a debtor, somebody who collects debt, and anything you know can be predicted out of his own characterization. So these are all things to know about characters. So characters can be human beings and can be animals in a story, or even objects or ideas. Love, hatred can be characters in a story. So this is very important for you to know. Then the next one is characterization. I mean, another element is characterization. When you create characters, especially imaginary or fictitious characters who are not real, you're supposed to create instances of what to do in them. They can't do anything because you create them. You have to characterize them. So by characterization, we mean the act of giving flesh and blood to imaginary characters for them to achieve what you want them to achieve, or do what you want them to do, for you to propel your own thematic preoccupation. That is what we call characterization. So to characterize is to give flesh and blood to characters that are not real. Since you create them, they have to do what you want them to do, because they can't do what they want to do because they do not even exist in reality. That is what we call characterization. The next let me say element of narrative is narrative techniques or styles. Every story is said to have a kind of, the writer is supposed to have a particular style they accomplish when dealing with the story. We call them narrative techniques or narrative styles. This is used to account for the point of view of a writer. It is a tool of narration through which the writer's style is sustained, and every good narrative involves the writer's style. So under this we have the following. Autobiographical narrative technique is the first one in this discussion, and it has to do with the use of first person, both singular and plural pronouns. You see, a writer may decide to be using I, we, to mean that the writer is also involved in the story. Us, as in us, us, to mean the writer is also involved. So when you are using this I, this personal pronouns, we see that you are using autobiographical narrative technique, especially if the narrative or the narrative essay is autobiography, An autobiography is an example of a non-fiction, and a non-fiction is a story that is not written based on the writer's imagination, but written based on reality or fact or even truism. So this is where you use autobiographical narrative technique. Then the next one is epistolary narrative technique. This is when the writer uses letters among characters as a form of communication. You know, somebody may decide that, okay, in my narrative essay, I will write or I will use a kind of letter. I'll use a letter. You will discover that the writer uses a letter in the narrative with the addresses, okay, the date, the recipient address, if it is formal letter, the salutation, the title, the body, complimentary clause, and whatever. You see it with your naked eyes on the book written by the writer. This is just an effect of the style of the writer, and we call it epistolary narrative technique. The next one is diary narrative technique. Diary narrative technique has to do with when the writer, okay, uses dates, as in 20th January 2020, so something happens on the 15th of February 2020. Another, you see, the writer is using dates, and we call it diary narrative technique. The next one is flashback narrative technique, which has to do with when the writer uses some incident to recall the past events, okay, unfolding themselves because of their effect that is summoned now in the contemporary issues as the characterization of the story is what ensued. This is just to see from the word flashback. It means the writer is taking you back to some things that have what happened, okay, that are maybe having effect now. A writer can start writing a story with a character at 20 of age, and subsequently the writer now takes the readership back to when the writer was even born, when he was even 5 months, or when he was even 2 years. You see, the writer is now taking you back to some things in the past, on the character's achievement or otherwise, when already the character is begun, okay, by his own characterization, to reflect that the character is already 30 years or 25 and so. So this is what we call flashback narrative technique. The next one is omniscient narrative technique, or the eye of God narrative technique. This is when the writer uses third person, both singular and plural pronouns, like he, she, him, they, okay, them, and the rest. It means that the writer is not part of the story, but he's using he, third person, male, she, third person, female, okay, her, him, they. This is just the issue of omniscient narrative technique. Then the last one here is assorted narrative technique. Assorted has to do with mixed thing, okay. When you assort, you mix. So assorted narrative technique has to do with when the writer uses more than one technique. Maybe autobiographical technique is there, epistolary narrative technique is there, diary narrative technique is there, flashback narrative technique is there. Then we now say that style of the writer is assorted narrative technique. That is it for narrative essay. The next type of essay is descriptive essay. From the word descriptive, it has to do with what? Description. And the word description is got from the word describe. And to describe is to create mental picture of something or someone on the mind of the readership or the audience. It means when you describe somebody, already the readership or the audience will have the image of that person or thing in question on their mind. On seeing the person, they do not need to be told this is the person being described. So descriptive essay, as one of the ways in which you can get involved in what you are writing and to get your readers involved is to vividly describe the people, the places, the things, experiences, or situations in your writing. And the ability to describe is a universal value of good writing. By all means, a detailed description is better than a general one. People usually prefer to create or to the concrete to create the abstract. When a reader is able to visualize what the writer is trying to say through vivid descriptive devices or weapons, the reader understands better and identifies more with the work. So descriptive is got from the word description, and which is also from the root word describe, which means to create mental picture of someone or something in the mind of the listener or reader. So every essay that is said to describe is said to be descriptive essay. For instance, topics given to you can either tell you whether a story is descriptive or a story is supposed to be narrative. For instance, if I say my first day in Nasarawa State University, invariably this dictates the rudimentary elements of a narrative essay. I'm supposed to be telling a story about my first day. But if I say Senate building, already this topic, for instance, gives you a clue of what expectation that lies on description. I'm supposed to be describing Senate building, unlike my first day in Nasarawa State University. So topics will tell you whether the story or the essay should be descriptive or narrative. The next one is expository essay. As the name implies, expository essay exposes, that is, explains, defines, informs, instructs, or even clarifies or amplifies how something can be done or can be achieved. It is the act of making or explaining certain phenomenon and the process involved in achieving it. For instance, now, if there is a kind of a manual of how to record LMS, okay, a manual trying to expose the secrets of how to record LMS, that is Learning Management System of Nasarawa State University, that manual can be said to be an expository essay because it is not telling a story, it is not describing, but giving you the steps on how to do the LMS recording. Or you say how to prepare shawarma, or the preparation of shawarma, maybe the topic. It means that whatever you will read will give you a clue, would equip your mind towards knowing how to follow the steps of achieving the final goal of making shawarma. So this is what we call expository essay. The last one is argumentative essay. By argumentative essay, we refer to, from the name, as the name implies, it has to do with what? An argument. And by argument, we mean for you to like involve in a kind of a critical evaluation of something. And topics given to you would tell you, as I've already mentioned, whether your essay is descriptive or your essay is narrative or your essay is expository or your essay is argumentative. For instance, if I give you a topic like doctor is better than a teacher, a doctor is better than a teacher, already this is giving you a clue to doing what? A kind of argument. You're supposed to present your ideas logically in order to persuade or convince or cajole your readership or your audience towards accepting your stance of argument. It means by logicality here. You're not supposed to just sit down and prepare the AC. You're supposed to involve yourself in researches and even consultations for you to have backups of instrument or things that you would have to use to corroborate or support your argument, because you are dealing with minds, and these minds are not just like a tabula rasa. They are not like a blank slate. They have a lot, okay, in their own minds, and they can reason. So it means you need a kind of a qualitative and logical sequence of ideas to like propel the readership or the audience to accept your own view of your own stance. By saying doctor is better than the teacher, you have to give reason why. If not, you can't convince, and that is what we call argumentative essay. That is it for essay and types. Now the next kind of composition is letter writing. A letter is a piece of correspondence or handwritten or printed text sent to a particular recipient. Letter writing has been regarded as a means of communication that is as long as the history of man and his social communicative life. Right from the inception, a man's art of writing, right from the inception of a man's art of writing, letter has served and is still serving the purpose or the means through which information, requests, applications, and the rest can be what? Achieved. And it means in the olden days, or in those days where this technological advancement were not ensued, the form of communication then was through majorly letter writing. But these days that we have phones, that you can do social achievement with them, you can involve yourself in social arts and to do a lot of things now. You can call, you can send text message, you can chat through WhatsApp or Facebook and other social media. Most times now, students don't even involve in letter writing, but still there are areas that would have to warrant you the interest of putting words together to form your letter, because you cannot send things through just WhatsApp or Facebook. For instance, if you're applying for a job, you have to write an application letter. If you have a complaint, maybe as a student, you have to write request letter. You can just a complaint letter. You can just chat your HOD through WhatsApp and be interacting with him for your own problem that you are facing. It's never done like that. It means whether we like it or not, letter writing is still in us, and we have to know how to do it as student, not even as student, as language users, that we have to make adjustments to our communicative life. Okay, now letters are broadly classified based on the following typology. 1, we have formal letter. Formal letter. This is a type of letter that is also referred to as official letter or even business letter. It is official because it has to emanate from one office to another, and it is business letter because the writer or the addresser and the receiver or the addressee do not have anything in common. What is between them in form of relationship is just a business relationship. It is just like you going to the market, giving your money and receiving your goods. It is what actually translates here. As a student, you pay school fee, and the school is also giving money to your lecturer to come and teach you. This is clean business. If you don't pay, nobody would allow you to interact as a student, and you have to pay for lecturers to assess your examinations and your continuous assessment. This is business. You can even finish your life here without the VC knowing you, without the registrar or any staff, only your lecturers when you even want them to know you. It means you are into business, and the letter you have to write is just a business letter, and this is why we call it formal letter. It is official, like I said. Don't think as a student you don't have an office. Your department is your office, and this is why when writing any letter to any of your lecturers or anything happening to you on campus, you have to identify your domiciled department, because that is your own office as a student. Okay, now formal letter, okay, as we have already mentioned, it is official since it emanates from one office to another. And it means, again, it is said to be business, like I mentioned, because both the addresser and the addressee have nothing in common but a business relationship. So these are two major things for you to understand about formal letter. There are features of formal letter that you have to know. One, writer's address or addresser's address and date. That is the first thing to be done when writing a formal letter. This is mostly written at the top right hand side of the paper, okay, which the date ensues with a little space separating the address and the date. The address can either be punctuated or left without punctuations, but it is worthy to note that when one chooses not to punctuate the address, okay, there must be full stop at the end of the address just before the date, which must also be punctuated. So this, whatever choice a writer makes, is still formally acceptable. The next one is receiver's address or addressee's address. This is the address of the person the writer is writing to. That is the person we refer to as addressee. So when you have your address, you have to also identify the address of the person to receive your letter, and this is written after a writer's address, and it must appear close to the left hand margin of a paper, that is starting from the next line below the date, but not the same right hand side, but what left hand margin of the paper. The next one is salutation. This is usually dear sir or even sir without the use of the der if the addressee is known to be male, or dear madam if the addressee is meant to be what? Female counterpart. It means you say dear madam when the recipient is female, or dear sir when the recipient is male. You can even say madam, that's all, or sir, that is all. So the salutation is written close to the left hand side margin too, below the addressee's address. Most salutations are not accompanied by names or recipients, since it is a public office and the occupant may get changed before the letter reaches or upon reaching the designation. But pertinent, it is to note here that there is an exceptional case where the sir may be avoided and to be replaced with the name of the receiver of the letter. It's just a kind of one side of the effect of formal letter. And when we come to discuss types of formal letter, we can see where names appear and where names are not supposed to appear. But 95% of formal letters do not have names of the recipient, because you write to the VC or to the HOD, for instance, and you use the HOD's name. Before your letter reaches, they change the HOD and they put another person. The person now occupying the office may not, in fact will not even regard the letter because it carries somebody's name and he's not that person. So this is where mostly we advise that you don't use names. But if you're writing complaint letter, for instance, you supply goods and something is missing, you have to address the issue to the company you must have engaged in the business. And that is to say, you have to identify the person in question with whom you've done the business from its start to the end. Maybe the managing director, you now say, "There, Mr. Chibuzo Ikemefuna." You see, you are just identifying the name as the managing director of that particular place, or the supplier, or whatever you may take the person to be. So these are just exceptional cases, but most importantly, formal letters majorly do not have names of the recipient. Okay, now subject matter or heading is the next one after the salutation. Unlike the old way of writing it, now the heading subsumes the main purpose of the letter in totality, since the receiver may not have time to read the body. You know, before, in those days, you can only write complaint letter as your heading, or application letter, or letter of application. These are instances of those days, but these days it is advised that you capture, okay, the purpose in totality in your heading. For instance, application for employment as a lecturer, application for employment as a graduate assistant, application for employment as officer 2, or admin staff 2. You see, you are just giving the complete purpose. Or complaint letter on ENG 1112 missing result. You see, it captures all the purpose of your own writing. So the next feature is the opening remark or paragraph. This explains why the writer writes in a simple sentence, which may also refer to the heading. For instance, opening paragraph can be, "I hereby write in respect of the subject matter referred above," or with reference to your letter dated blah blah. So these are just introductory or introductory paragraphs or opening remarks. Informal letter, which is usually following the subject matter or the heading. Another thing on the subject matter, is when you write it in capital letters. If you write your subject matter in capital letters, you don't underline. But if you write them in small letters, there are rules that guide them. 1, you have to underline when written in small letters. And 2, you must know content words and function words. The content words must have their initial letters capitalized, while the function words have nothing like capitalization. For instance, we say letter of complaint. Okay, letter of complaint. There are 3 words here: letter, of, and complaint. 1 word is just a function word, but 2 words are content words. Letter is a content word because it carries meaning in itself. Complaint is another content word because it carries meaning in itself. But of does not carry any meaning in itself. It is just functioning to bring these 2 together. So it means that letter must have its initial letter capitalized. L is the initial letter. You have to capitalize it. Then complaint has C as the initial letter. You have to also capitalize it. So if you don't know all these rules, just close your eyes and put everything in capital letters and don't underline. That is all. So with the opening remark, we have already mentioned if is written, "I hereby write in respect to this," or with reference to your letter dated this, especially when you are replying a letter being sent to you. These are called opening remarks or introductory paragraphs. The body of the letter now is the next thing. It follows the opening remark. This is where the main message is contained and elaborated in simple sentences, and do not write in too many of them. It hints on the subject matter achieved in short paragraphs. It means in the body of the letter we call formal letter, we don't need to see you writing a lot of things, writing jargons or being verbose, using words beyond the need to use them. You have to be concise and precise, because the readership does not have time to go through your letter. It is not an informal letter that you can write whatever you want to write and whatever number of words or sentences. This one you have to be concise, and that is, it has to be concise. That is just the issue being explained here. The next thing is the concluding paragraph. The concluding paragraph, as the name implies, concludes the letter, which mostly can be looking forward to seeing your response and thanks in anticipation, or thanking you in anticipation of your kind consideration. Nonetheless, it depends on the kind of formal letter somebody is writing. Okay, for instance, if you are writing a letter of complaint, you can stop here as your concluding paragraph. But if you are writing application letter for employment, for instance, you do not stop here. You now conclude by saying, find attached my curriculum vitae and photocopies of my credentials for your consideration. It means you are attaching something, and even if it is the complaint letter in question that would have to suggest you to printing your result and to attach it, you have to say it, find attached the copy of my result for your scrutiny. So it depends on actually what you are doing. If you are attaching something, you have to say it in your concluding paragraph. If you are not attaching anything, thanking you in anticipation of your kind response or kind consideration is enough for the concluding paragraph. The next thing after this is the complimentary clause. This is mostly yours faithfully or faithfully yours, depending on your choice, or yours sincerely or sincerely yours, depending on your own interest. But there are two things here. If it is faithfully yours or yours faithfully, it means that you do not mention the name of the recipient, as I've already explained. But in any case, you mention the name of your recipient, as we have explained exceptional case, then it is not going to be yours faithfully, but yours sincerely. So this is also accompanied by signature of the writer and full official name. Signature comes first before the official name. Okay, good. Okay, now these are some of the things you have to understand about a formal letter. But I know somebody would ask, after name, do you need to write your phone number? No, it depends actually. Oh yes, it depends actually. For instance, you're writing an application letter for employment that you have to attach CV. Your CV comprises all your email address, your phone number or contact, your contact address, and whatever. No need of you putting any number here. Okay, it is only, for instance, you're writing a complaint letter, you do not attach any of your documents or your results. You can put your matriculation number after your name. This is just for a particular reason that, okay, the readership would just trace your issue by using your matriculation number. We have types of formal letter like application letter, letter of inquiry, sales letter, apology letter, request letter, invitation letter, and the rest. Okay, informal letter now. As the name implies, informal. Informal letter is unlike formal letter. This one is another name for informal letter is personal letter. Personal letter, because the writer and the receiver of the letter have something in common, something personal. You're writing to your father, your mother, your brother, your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, okay, your friend or whatever. It is called informal letter because there are no rules that guide how you use the language. It depends on who actually you are dealing with. Okay, so informal letter is a kind of a letter we call, again, personal letter, as I've already mentioned, because it is written to those we have personal or blood relationship with. So this is just simple. It has features now of informal letter: address and date. You have to put your address and your date, just as we have explained that of a formal letter. That is how you arrange this one, depending on how you want it to be. Okay, depending on how you want it to be. There is no rule of how to use the date or whatever. Do as much as you can because it is informal letter. Salutation in informal letter also depends on the writer's choice, as no rules guide it. That is the next feature. It can be any of the following: hi, hello, dear dad, dear mom, my dear husband, my dear wife, my dear sweetheart, dear baby, hi friend, hello my dear lollipop, dear honey, my dear shawarma, dear uncle KB, dear auntie Z. All these things you can use them. Nothing like sir or madam, no, anything. Opening remark. This is not guided by rule too. Many ways ensue here depending on the relationship you have with the receiver. You can say, best compliment of the season, my lovely wife, my warm regards and hope you are good today. Good morning, my kind respect. All these things you can use them. It depends on what you want to say. Salutation, in this we say depends on what you are dealing with and who is your receiver of the letter, and that also dictates the choice of words in the opening remark and even the body of the letter. In the body, the writer exhausts all they have to say. You can write in 10 pages because the reader has enough time to read them. They are not meant for offices. This is why we don't refer them as official letters. It means you can read them in your house, in your kitchen, in your sitting room, while in car, anything. You can use it and read it, and just even when you are cooking food, you can just be reading them. And that is just what we mean by informal letter in the body. Okay, the concluding paragraph. Here the writer uses such expressions like, please extend my regards to Auntie Lolo and co. I really miss them. I hope to hear from you soon, sweet dad. Kindly register my warm regards to your lovely wife, and the rest. You can use whatever you want to use. No rule guides it. The next one is complimentary clause. This is unlike the formal letter. It can be so many things. Yours ever, yours most affectionately, yours darling, yours shawarma, yours lollipop, yours industry, yours whatever. You use whatever you can, whatever you want to use. No rules, unlike the other one we mentioned. It can be yours Gwandi, yours heartbeat, yours cucumber, any of this, followed by name in informal way too. For instance, Joe aka Tupac, MB Ubaidi, KB ATC, and again no signature of the writer. Once you put the complimentary clause, there is nothing like signature. Nothing like signature. And that is all. That is how it ends. There is another type of letter we call semi-formal letter. Semi-formal letter has features of formal letter, but in content it has some features of an informal letter. So it is between formal letter and informal letter. It has all the features we mentioned in formal letter: the two addresses, the salutation, the heading, the opening paragraph or opening remark, the body, the concluding paragraph, okay, complimentary clause. They are there. But in content of these features, we see where it is not too formal, but it relates the mind of the reader to know that the writer is having something in common with them. For instance, now, Dear sir or dear madam is a salutation of formal letter. But in semi-formal letter, for instance, the writer, if he is writing to a Muslim boss because they are attached, they have something in common, they are friends now, he even knows his house, they know themselves, they go for outing, they travel together, you see, they have changed from having just business relationship but something else. You can use assalamu alaikum or peace be upon to you in Christ. You see, this is just to signal you that there is something maybe commonly shared between the writer and the receiver. So for this, we don't call it completely formal and we don't call it completely informal, because still there are some things to be maintained, because the person is not your biological relation and the rest. Okay, now furthermore, emphasis is placed again on the fact that it features some characteristics of informal letter too, as I've already mentioned, and I have given you this example. And with this, I think the writer and the recipient would be able to dictate a kind of accent to which or at which they find a kind of a sense of familiarity in their own relationship. So in the body too, some choices will show the familiarity effect between the writer and the receiver. All these may set the sense of familiarity in the letter, and when someone writes to the VC of Unsuk, such lexical choices can not have a stance. You can't write to the VC, even if you're Muslim and he's Muslim, you can't write to him and say assalamu alaikum. You have, it's never done. Or the VC is a Christian brother and you write by saying peace be unto you in Christ. It can never happen, because a letter to VC is strictly formal. But any other thing, relationship maybe with him outside here, maybe you have another thing you do in other places that are not strictly like formal here. You know yourselves, he knows you, you go to his house, he goes to you. There are some elementary things in the choices of words that will show familiarity, and that is not informal letter and that is not formal letter. We call it semi-formal letter. The last topic is the concept of paragraph. The concept of paragraph. Paragraph is a group of sentences that develop one topic or ideas, and it has three major or main parts. The first part is the topic sentence. It is called the topic sentence because it states the topic or the subject matter of the paragraph. The second main part is supporting sentence or supporting sentences, and from the name as it implies, it supports the idea being propelled by the topic sentence. So whatever the topic sentence mentions, the writer elaborates them using supporting sentences. And the last one, the last part, is the concluding sentence, and as the name implies, it summarizes the paragraph or adds a final comment for clarity effect. So a clear academic paragraph requires all of these parts. A paragraph is a self-contained unit of discourse and writing which deals with a particular point or idea. It starts, is indicated by beginning on a new line, and sometimes the first line is indented. This is how we see paragraphs. They are like divisions, okay, in terms of writing. When you open any book, you discover that the ideas flow in what divisions. You may have 4 lines, then it ends there, and the writer just comes down to start like continuation with some lexical or some texts like furthermore, moreover. You see, this is to reflect what? Paragraphing. And sometimes the first lines of each paragraph is indenting. This is very important in every composition, be it essay writing that has to do with narrative, argumentative, expository. You have to centralize all these things in question. We talk about paragraphing, and you have to compartmentalize the entirety of the work into paragraphs for readership to understand and follow what you do in terms of the writing and for the ideas to flow. There are characteristics of a good paragraph. One, we have variety. Variety here entails on the need to use different kinds of sentence in terms of structure. It is a quality of a good paragraph to reveal the sense of sentence kinds like simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, compound complex sentences, and even multiple sentences. You can't just be using simple sentences anyhow and anywhere. It doesn't sound to be normal as a good writer, and the paragraphs would not be regarded as good paragraphs. It has to be mixture of all these types of sentence. Use simple sentences, in some places use compound sentences, in some places use multiple sentences or compound or complex sentences. It makes the work to look interesting by the readership as they interchange. The next characteristic of a good paragraph is clarity. Clarity. A good paragraph is developed with choices of words that do not pose difficulty in the readership. Use words that are clear to the minds and on the minds of the readership. Do not use words anyhow put together. You have to follow some certain rules of the grammar of those words in the language, okay, so that your reader can read and understand. Do not pose difficulty to the readership. So diction is where we see clarity of your writing, and by diction we mean choices of words. So they have to be clear so that the target audience do not have any difficulty. So here a writer needs to justify appropriate use of grammatical and punctuation rules that govern the use of the chosen diction, and this is to make the paragraph decipher and less ambiguous. So this is very simple. Punctuate well, because punctuation that is well done brings about clarity of your writing. Good. The next one is conciseness. One of the qualities of a paragraph is that wordiness or verbosity is avoided and expressions are simplified in order to make the message of the writer understandable. So you have to be concise. Do not use words more than how they are required. Use words in their own appropriate functions so that they operate functionally to bring about your own target. The next one is unity. From the word unity. Every good paragraph must have its topic sentence, supporting sentences, and concluding sentences united. Unity in paragraphs of a composition is what sustains the entirety of the structure of the said composition. It means when you say the world in Nigeria in terms of politics is changing its own step to something else compared to what was witnessed in those days. You see, this for instance is a topic sentence. It means whatever the supporting sentences will say would have to show why politics now is different from politics then. You see, there is unity. And even concluding paragraph will have to show you are talking about politics. But if you are saying something like food, how to prepare shawarma in the writing, it is contrary to what you have said in the topic sentence. It means there is no unity. And this is a very bad thing in terms of paragraph development. The last one here is coherence. Another quality of a good paragraph is coherence. This has to do with having the parts of a paragraph in a meaningful order, and the ideas presented in a particular or in a paragraph must be orderly arranged and understandable. There must be logical sequence of ideas. This can be attained through the use of conjunct or transitional words such as however, nevertheless, indeed, finally, As a result of this, in contrast to, again, all these things are cohesive devices. We call them cohesive devices. They link ideas together. When you say this in this paragraph, and second paragraph, you are saying as a result, for instance, or in spite of, you are connecting the ideas to mean that you are achieving the sense of unity in your writing. This is it for what we call paragraphs and characteristics of paragraphs. And I wish you all the best, and I ask you to follow these things very well with your mindset at rest, so that you decipher meaning out of what we have mentioned. Thank you.